Phil, a lot of people asked after we did our budget episode, which we'll link at the end of the episode so that you can go and check out the several budget decks in Premodern that you can get into. How Stasis works, why it's so powerful, what makes this, in my opinion, the best deck in the format. And of course, you can look here and click the link, and you'll get a full deck list right there on our Eternal Dirtles Mox Field. There we go. So now let's talk about the deck. Let's talk about what makes this deck work, why it is so potent, and what sort of separates Stasis in this format than any other format. I think it bears mentioning like why Stasis works in Premodern, why it works in Old School, and maybe it doesn't work as well in formats with more modern cards.
Yeah, well, I mean, which axis do you want to start on first?
Well, let's just start with talking about the deck. And I went ahead and I made sure that all of the art on the cards is indicative of the way I ideally designed this deck, visually speaking, with the cards that I own, or at least are very close to the cards I own here.
And Zach and I might be the Stasis Bros coming into LobsterCon 2026.
True, yeah.
At least for one of the days that we're there, we might just like high five as the Dirtles Stasis Bros. That way we can actually live up to the Dirtles nomenclature.
Truly dirtling,
we're just going
eternally.
Yeah, we are just eternally dirtling here.
So one of the things I think you and I, well, first off, this list is one card off of the LobsterCon list that I played at LobsterCon. The main difference being I have a Shivan Reef in the main, and I have removed a City of Brass from the sideboard, and I replaced that with another Curse Totem in the sideboard.
Yeah, and then my build is like still in the works. Like I still need more reps with mine, but there are things that I have found that like I can tell how much more advanced you are in terms of like how much experience you've gotten with the deck, because in your flex slots you have things like a Curse Totem, you're playing 2 Misdirection, you're playing 2 Arcane Denial, you're playing a Propaganda. And then you're now teching on sideboard colored spells that aren't blue, and I'm over here being like I play a pair of mana short. I'm anywhere between 2 and 3 Propaganda across my 75. I don't have any arcane denials in the deck at the moment. So I'm a little bit skewed more towards board control, but you have some amount of that between Propaganda and Curse Totem because the stuff that you care about on the board is there. I'm also on the 4 Thwart and 4 Black Vice. I'm on just like the clean 4 of package to like figure out what I like and what I don't until figuring it out. But then we've had some experimentation talk. Like, I mean, there are things that once you like start experimenting with Stasis, I never thought I would get to. I was like, oh man, you want to know what I would really like to do? Not have to worry about Black Vice, like not having text. Like there are just some matchups where like they can relatively keep their hand empty, or if you don't have the Curse Totem and they resolve one of their discard guys, then they can stay under a Black Vice forever. I was just talking to SWB yesterday at the local where I was like, yeah, he made some changes to his sideboard guide, so we'll talk about that in the future for Parfait. But he had when we did the deck tech on his list, he had 2 Ivory Tower, one in the main, one in the 75. And I was like, man, the second Ivory Tower really just can blank Black Vice, can it? And so like there's some ways to combat Black Vice. So I was like, man, is there anything that we can do other than that? And eventually I was like, can we get to like, is there anything to use like Thran Turbine and like Soldevi Digger? So you could just like, you could do that. You're not actually tapping any permanents while you like cycle back through, and then like, and also because like the only spells that go to your graveyard because you're not playing any fetch lands is action. So I was like, oh, maybe you just you just lock people out that way, and then you don't have to care about life totals at all. But there's a lot of experimentation, even though this deck is like, I don't know, just sort of rumbling underneath as like a known commodity that's like very powerful in your view, the best deck in the format, and yet it's still like there is not a consensus like 75.
Yeah, I think, well, let's go through each card and kind of talk about their place in the deck. Obviously, let's just start with the namesake card, Stasis. This is the engine of the deck. You need this in order to make the deck work at all. Players don't get an untapped step. It basically makes it so that almost everything in Premodern needs to untap to work. You know, the caveats of like a Yoshin Soldier or like Sarah Angel. And then there are a couple other cards that can sort of circumvent the being able to tap situation. Lightning Angel being one of them as well. Lightning Angel, a threat that you actually will see.
Lightning Angel And these are the cards where you're playing a ton of counter magic, and so all of the stuff that you care about that does that's not exactly elves, costs either a lot of mana and it's at sorcery speed. So typically your counter magic will just be loaded to handle those cards if you know that they're in the deck. Like if you're playing against Jeskai and you think that Lightning Angel is going to be the thing that you have to fight over, you just sit back to fight over that. And then they will have tapped enough mana that it will be really hard for them to fight over that, since so much of your counter magic is either 2 mana or free. And then against the only real problem child, and I think the thing that more or less keeps the perception of Stasis at bay in a way that there wasn't really for Parfait with land tax, was that Elves' existence, like if Stasis was like S tier, just because it's got such a bad matchup in Elves, it'll never be like, oh, this deck is too good.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is, I don't foresee this deck. I do think it is one of the best decks in the format, but I don't think that this deck will ever be in a situation where people will be like, this is too good, it needs to be banned, because there are checks in the format against a deck like this. Finding the right high-end cards for Legacy, Vintage, Premodern, or Old School Magic can be challenging. That's where friends 3-for-1 trading come in.
3-for-1 Trading is one of Europe's top Magic the Gathering retailers with an incredible selection of premium singles, sealed product, and even full sets, all available with free, fast, and secure worldwide shipping.
They add fresh inventory every Wednesday with weekly deals and discounts. So whether you're hunting for that elusive piece of power, a legacy staple, or something spicy for your collection, they've got you covered.
First high-end orders over $500 or €500, use the code EDFREE to get free worldwide shipping.
Check them out now at the number 3, the number 4, the number 1.gg/ED. That link takes you right to the shop and helps support the channel.
Huge thanks to 3-for-1 Trading for supporting the Legacy community. Now back to the show.
There's just a clear natural predator for the deck, and that is a very popular deck. Like when we go into LobsterCon, like we have to have a plan. Either we hope to dodge elves or we have to have a plan for elves, which is the conversation of every Stasis video, because they have so many just inherent untap effects to get around Stasis that it sort of just blanks the piece.
Yeah. Now, if you're familiar with this deck in Old School, you know Stasis has to be combined with a way to sort of lock your opponent down. And in what's called Old School, you use Kismet, so that way everything that they play comes to play tapped, and you play a very long game. Nothing is really free in Old School, so you have to play Kismet to like sort of lock everything down. Whereas in Premodern, you have cards like Daze, Gush, and Thwart that will send lands back to your hand as they're quote unquote tapping your opponent's lands. So that allows you to stay in the game, and it gives you the same sort of effect as Kismet has, but you don't actually have to like take a turn off to like slam a 4-mana enchantment that your opponent can easily just disenchant, and the game continues to run for them. With this one, you can actually just play Stasis on turn 2 or turn 3. Turn 2 if you have a Forsaken City, and then sit under it for the rest of the game. So the lock is much faster with this deck, but those cards I mentioned, Thwart, Gush, and Daze here do a lot of the work to keep you in the game, and also slow down your opponent's game as well. If they have to spend 3 mana to play a card and you Gush it, they're literally going back 3 turns, whereas you're only going back 1 turn, and you're actually going up a card to put back down either through Forsaken City or just play an island again and tap it for the Stasis. So there's a lot of play that cards with like these drawbacks of return an island to your hand have in this deck that are not drawbacks. They're actively good.
Yeah, and part of what is really powerful about this deck is that all the cards that it wants to play, there aren't really that many concessions. They're all just very good cards in the format. Like you get to play more than one Thwart, which is something that is super powerful, that if other decks could afford it, they probably would try to. But like Gush is one of, if not the best card in the format. You're one of the few decks that actually gets to leverage Daze in a meaningful way, because you're not a Daze Wasteland deck, but you are locking down their mana base with Stasis a lot of the time. So Daze stays live later into the game than most do. And then all of the other stuff like Counterspell, Chain of Vapor, like these are all just generically good cards. And then the flex slots are the ones where you get to have a little bit of fun. Like nobody else is going to run Arcane Denial, but like that's
Arcane
also
Denial
not like
actively great for you because of Black Vice.
That's the thing. Like if you when you're just trying to fight over whatever it is that they're going to do, and then you lock them down under Stasis, all the counter magic essentially has the same text, right? It's just like fight over that one thing, lock you down. Like, they all do the same thing, and then it's like anything else is cake. So you're like, okay, either you, because the one in a blue, like the advantage of the one in a blue for Arcane Denial, all of your lands tap for blue. That's not going to be a bottleneck the way
Not
that
a big deal.
Counterspell
It is
for
just
other
a 2-mana counterspell that draws you a card and almost never draws your opponent 2 cards.
And yeah, right, because your opponent is going to fear drawing multiple cards for Blackvice. I've played with and against Arcane Denials where I have also declined to draw, so it's just a counterspell that replaces itself from my opponent. And then I've also been in positions where, like, couldn't deny the value and then died to that choice because Blackvice, like, caught it.
Yeah.
So
important here, we only are playing 1 cantrip. Some people like to play Portent. I'm not a Portent truther myself. I play Impulse. You need to find your stasises to make this deck work. So I aggressively mulligan a little bit to make sure that I have a little bit of action between Gush and Impulse. You can kind of get there. And then Arcane Denial being like another draw piece in the deck. Not something you want to rely on per se, but it's like you need to see more cards so that you can see a stasis, because oftentimes there are very few matchups where stasis is not the number one thing you want to be doing.
That's really the paradigm when figuring out whether or not you want to play Portent at all, right? Like, it's how comfortable and aggressive are you in your mulligans, given that you need to find a namesake card. And if you are playing Portent is your 1-mana spell that if you see it in your opener and you don't see a stasis, it's a much more likely keep than if you were not running Portent and then have to mulligan. Now, the mulligan is super powerful, and I'm sure that we can figure out whatever the math would look like to be like, is it actually more advantageous? Because there are certain components that you want to piece together. Like, if you think about it, at the end of the day, this is a stasis deck, but it is an A+B combo deck where you're like first stasis, then Blackvice, or Blackvice on the table and then stasis you. Either way, it involves getting a stasis down. You can win the game in other ways.
Yeah.
But
there is a patience and discipline to this deck of knowing that you can take hits to a certain point while you're searching for your stasis, or knowing that, like, maybe now's not the time to play the stasis. You've got to wait until your opponent like taps out, because they're going to have things that they can do to get under your stasis and stuff. So you need to be cognizant of those things. Like Wirewood Symbiote is a great example, right? There's a discipline to this deck that comes with getting the reps in, for sure. And that's why I can make decisions like Curse Totem, that's dead in a lot of matchups, and Misdirection that has it does have multiple uses. A lot of people are like, Misdirection, what are you misdirecting? Someone's burn spell? Sometimes yes, because hitting a Jackal Pup with their own lightning bolt is actually pretty great. But a lot of times it's just to protect the stasis when you're casting it, because there's a lot of blue in Premodern. So you want to get stasis down, but you don't want to tap a bunch of your lands to counter their counterspell, and then you don't have any lands to tap for stasis next turn. So you play Misdirection, you play Foil, you play these cards that can counterspell stuff for free, because at the end of the day, the number of cards in your hand doesn't matter as much as the fact that you're stopping your opponent from playing the rest of the game. So if you get to a point where you and your opponent both don't have many cards in hand, or they have several cards in hand but they're tapped out, and you're using your last card to make stasis stick, the game is oftentimes over from there, because everything that they do is to get back into the game, and everything you do is to just stop them from getting back into the game. Once you have a Blackvice and a stasis on the board, and you have a couple cards in hand, you're generally going to be in a situation where the game is actually over for your opponent. And many people will know when to scoop, but many won't. The game does end relatively quickly once a Blackvice and a stasis is down.
Yeah, I mean, once they're taking 3 to 4 a turn, you only need a couple of turn cycles, and you don't have to take that many game actions. So you just play your land past the turn, and it goes pretty quickly. I think that, like, looking at your list and thinking about it more, especially like with Misdirection being loaded as it's really just a proactive Force of Will against other blue decks. Misdirection countering other counter magic is actually just a Force of Will effect, where you just pitch a blue card and you counter that spell because you just misdirect it to the Misdirection. And if you're expecting that in a metagame, that can be really potent. Like, if you think there's just going to be a lot of Dreadnought and they're playing a ton of counter magic, you're like, yeah, misdirect that thing, stick this down, lock you out of the game. And I think that that's really part of what's powerful about Stasis, is that the stuff that it actually wants does not comprise 60 cards. Like, you can get all of the things that you want for Stasis, and still have plenty of room left over
Yeah, there's a
to
lot of
then
wiggle
figure
room
out what
here.
you want to do for the rest of the thing, which is not the same for a lot of decks that are like, oh man, like when I'm thinking about Parfait, like what we talked about in the last episode, I'm like, man, space is tight. Like you want all of these component pieces, you want all of these answers to different things. You presumably will get to have a lot of your deck in your hand a lot of the time, so you're going to see your answers, but you have to have the answers in your deck. And so you're trying to think like, what are the correct numbers here? What is the, variability of the thing? Like, trying to figure out the number of enlightened tutors that's correct is just like an insanely challenging puzzle. Whereas like Stasis, it's like very clearly you want, and then okay, now there's like all this openness to be like, what can we do? And that's really enticing for a deck going into like as Premodern continues to evolve over time, knowing that Stasis sort of just inherently has this like 5 to 10 card flex slot section of its deck to just do whatever it wants. And the fact that Forsaken City is also a rainbow land. So, you're playing red in the board for a bunch of pyroclasms, but I've seen black in the sideboard before for Duress, which is sort of doing what you're doing with the Misdirection. I've seen that for Plague Engineer or Engineered Plague out of the board to handle creatures as well.
To handle elves, yeah.
To handle elves. I, right now, am currently in the space of trying to test out Essence Flare, which is just the blue mana enchantment to deal with 1-drops. Like, or X1s, rather.
It's a great...
Because, like, you have the bottleneck of, like, well, Korean Ranger sucks, Wired Symbiote sucks for me, Lackey sucks for me. So, like, there's all of these X1s that are just, like, really good against you if they can get underneath what you're doing to try and get under. So, like, just having a 1-mana blue removal spell for it is very good.
Yeah, there's definitely an argument here for removing some cards from the sideboard for Essence Flare. Like, I would not argue with somebody who's like, hey, I want to make sure that my Essence Flare, does what it needs to do. Or sorry, I want to make sure that like Goblin Lackey doesn't like remove me from the game. And so those are options for sure. Like there's a little wiggle room here, especially like I would say that this deck has a few flex slots. Your 4th Black Vice is a flex slot. You can certainly play 4 Black Vice. Many people do. The Propaganda and Curse Totem are flex slots. You can mess around with those numbers. I prefer Propaganda in a world where creatures can come down relatively early and you just may need to stop them from being able to ever attack again.
Yeah, this is the conversation of Propaganda, because like I'm closer to going to like 3 Propaganda than I am going down to 1 or cutting. But that's primarily because I feel like the matchups where Stasis struggles, for me at least, has been those like play a bunch of creature wide type strategies, even if you Stasis, only because those decks are typically lower to the ground or have some sort of mana cheats, whether it's Gaia's Cradle or Lackey. And so they can sort of circumvent the fact that they're tapped out, like their mana is tapped out, because they can just get these bursts of mana. And so I find that like the matchups where Stasis struggles the most, to me, are those go wide creature matchups. And so rather than try and like, concede that game 1 and then try and go into the board when you're still a dog, and like if you're going to try and beat those matchups at all, I think it's better inclined to put them in those cards in the main and then, solve other problems in the sideboard. And the rationale for that is if you're playing against like other blue decks, I think you are pretty well set up because you have so much more free counter magic than them. And your counter magic is trying to do something where you need to stick 1 card. Like if we're playing against Stiflenought, right? Their Chain of Vapors aren't very good. Our Chain of Vapors can 2-for-1 them and set them back. Their counter magic, they're playing 4 days for counterspell, some number of foil, whether like I've seen upwards of 4, but like they're on some number of foil, but they're not on any thwart, where you're on 3 thwart, and then you're potentially matching as many foils as they do or getting close to it. And then if you are playing some number of Propaganda, you can take 1 hit from the Dreadnought, and then it doesn't matter, So like there's things where it's like if the other decks can like do their thing, and then that's still not good enough. Whereas like the decks that I find that like Propaganda or Curse Totem in your case are like solving the problems, like they're doing a lot of weight is on those cards.
Also, something to think about, Phil, is with Dreadnought, and we'll talk more on the Patreon about the sideboard plans and stuff. But something to think about that happened to me, and I didn't realize. So this is a great life lesson for everybody. At LobsterCon was phasing happens during your untap step. That means that if things are phasing back in, they don't. So if somebody decides to vision charm a Dreadnought,
Get him.
you're like, great, it's
Got him.
exiled forever, or
You
at
know,
least
honestly,
until the stasis goes away.
Dude, in a way, how hot is that for tech to be like, yeah, we could play that ourselves just to like get rid of artifacts.
Yeah,
like,
it is a thing you can do. I think that, you know, as far as like things are concerned, like if somebody plays a Dreadnought against me, I'm trying to counter the other thing that they do. But now knowing that if the other thing they do is vision charm, you can ignore that as long as you can hold on to the stasis, right?
Dude, if you're playing against another control deck too, you could also just do the Stiflenought trick of like protecting your Black Vice. Phase out this Black Vice, get you.
Yeah, but you do have to worry about, you know, okay, then they chain a vapor your stasis, and then they get to untap with their Dreadnought and attack. So you do have to worry about those things. But if you know that you can protect the stasis, then don't waste your mana, waste your resources on the vision charm.
Zach, question for you. There are a couple of cards that before we shift over. First off, I just want to say I fucking love this, man. Like Stasis just gets me, just fills my heart.
Yep.
This style of deck. Okay, so I think like as we've talked through in this 20 minutes, I figured out why, like instinctively, and have always wanted the 4th thwart every time we talk. Like there was a time where you were at 2 thwart and like a while back, and now I see that you're at 3 thwart. I've been a 4 thwart truther the whole time, but I never really understood other than that, like, you know, it's free and it's awesome and like you pick up your islands. And what I realize now talking about this is Gush is really the only card advantage spell that we have.
Yes.
Like actual hard counters, like card advantage spell that we have is Gush.
It does draw you 4 cards.
Right. But I think what I intrinsically am always drawn towards the 4th thwart is I'm like, this is ancestral. In a lot of ways, like just picking up the islands to then redeploy them after the fact when those islands that would otherwise be tapped down. Like if you think about like an island that's tapped down under stasis, that is a resource gone. And so when you get to pick up your islands, that's really like in this, what this deck is trying to do, that's really like drawing a card. And so I find that like my sensibility towards wanting more card advantage all the time is sort of why I think this is really cool. Cause like we've been thinking about thwart, like every time we've memed about this conversation, and I never really articulated that. Like, I think it's because thwart feels like a card advantage spell.
Well, Phil, let's kind of talk about the play pattern of Stasis really fast, because I think that will kind of enlighten people on like how these things happen, right? Like, what is the expected result of casting a Stasis is that your opponent doesn't untap anything and concedes the game. Of course, that's what you want to have happen. But generally, what happens is you play a Stasis, you have a low amount of cards in your hand. Maybe you have 1 or 2 islands untapped. Maybe you're just relying on the Forsaken City, right? And if you only have 1 card in your hand and you have to discard it every turn to the Forsaken City, you're kind of in a space where like you're just waiting for your opponent to draw a Wasteland and for the game to be over, right? Now, with cards like Thwart, with cards like Daze, with cards like Gush, you're able to kind of recoup the cards that you draw for those islands that you put in your hand that you can either discard or replay and tap, right? I think that the smart thing to do here is to not put yourself in a situation where you lose if your opponent gets a Wasteland. So what I will generally do, if I only have the Forsaken City untapped, right, and I can Gush, or I can, if I can get islands back to my hand, right? So I will Gush, bring back 2 islands, and then on the next turn, when I conceivably would have to determine whether or not I'm going to untap, start discarding cards, or losing islands, we can assume that I played an island on my turn. So I have an untapped island. I have a City of Traders, right?
Or City of Forsaken City.
Forsaken City. I tap my island here, right? And then I play another island, right? I keep playing islands, and I always want to make sure that I have 1 island untapped, right?
Yeah. So
in case my opponent goes, I'll hit your Forsaken City, and now what are you going to do, right? So now I'll get to a point where I go, okay, on my next turn, I'm going to tap the Forsaken City, right? I'll have the island untapped, but I'm going to tap the Forsaken City. And I'm going to keep on that plan with the island here as insurance, right? Until I get to a point where I get another Thwart off, a Daze off, or a Gush off. And at that point, you're just rolling until you have a Black Vice in play. And at that point, you should be winning the game.
Yeah, essentially, keeping one island untapped is free counterspell for their wasteland.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you just think, like, oh, I'm going to leave this land up because this land up represents a counterspell to wasteland. And that's like a subtle but nuanced thing of timing, because if your opponent understands that they can catch the Forsaken City without an untapped mana source on your end, then you just lose the stasis, and then the entire game is lost. Or everything that you worked for up until that point is lost. So it's like it's just like a very easy thing to play around, but it's certainly one that, like, once you learn that lesson one time, you're like, oh, that was stupid. Like, I will never do that again. But like, it's also like, it's the bolting the Tarmogoyf thing, right?
Yeah,
like, everybody has to do it to, like, fully understand, like, oh, okay, I understand how this works now.
There's a couple other play patterns I want to speak on as well, Phil. One of them is bouncing your stasis back with Chain of Vapor. So you've got like 10 islands in play, right? And now you've only got one island up, and you're like, okay, I'm going to cast Chain of Vapor targeting my stasis. This is a great time, by the way.
At the end of their turn.
At the end of their turn. Yeah, very important, at the end of their turn. I'll explain why in a second. But so you do that at the end of their turn, right? And then this is a great opportunity if your opponent does have something in play. Like, let's say they have a Phyrexian Dreadnought that's been tapped. This is a great opportunity for you to sack one of your 10 islands, right? And bounce the Dreadnought back into their hand too, because it's basically free at this point. So then on your turn, you're going to untap the 9 islands you have now after doing that. Replay Stasis, and you basically just said, here's 8 more turns of me keeping Stasis in play. That's over. That's a great time for your opponent to be like, the game is now over, right? Even if you don't have Black Vice in play, like, you're considered to have so many resources if you have like a couple of cards in hand that the game is just going to be over. Now, what happens when you don't? Another important part of this is what happens, Phil, when you don't pay for Stasis.
When you just choose not to pay for it.
Let's say you don't have any lands. You go to your upkeep, and Stasis dies.
You don't get to untap.
Yeah, well, you didn't get to untap, so that's important. So you have to think about timing with this, especially if you're playing against the deck, right? If you're a deck that wants to screw Stasis over, and mess with them, or like use their land, you want to do it in a situation where if they get into a situation where they can't afford to keep the Stasis in play, they won't get to untap. I see this a lot from people that I play against on Magic Online or in tournaments where they suboptimally think that it's the smart play to do it like on my turn, and then I can or at the end of their end of my turn or something like that, or during. You just want to make sure that, like, whatever you do, if the Stasis goes, the Stasis player doesn't get to optimize by being like, oh, cool, I'll untap and I'll just do the other thing. Like, you don't want to, like, at the end of my turn or during my main phase, I'm going to naturalize this to, like, make you use up a bunch of resources. And then they're like, yeah, I'll just foil it or whatever. Like, you have to think about what's the worst case scenario for a Stasis player. And that's that they don't get to untap. They've time walked themselves, and you get a free turn of just uninteractive gameplay that you get to have. So it's very important to know that as a Stasis player, and to know that as a opponent, a Stasis player.
So break that down again. You're saying that timing wise, when somebody's fighting over a Stasis, you're saying that it's best to do it when.
So a common thing that happens is somebody draws a naturalize and they have 2 mana left, and they're just like, I don't want them to draw more cards. Like, they'll probably. What if they draw a counterspell next turn, right? A thwart, let's say, right? I'm going to do it now. You actually want to wait until their upkeep, until they like, or when the you would think that you'd want to wait till before they have paid it, so that they won't be able to pay it, right? You want to wait till after they've paid it, because then they've tapped that mana, right? They paid for the Stasis. Then you get it on their turn. Now, most of the time, people are trying to interact on other people's turns. This is fine. It makes sense. But when you're worried about, oh, what if they draw like another card? You're just better off just going for it and making them have to have it on the upkeep and not on the on like your turn. You'd rather than
you're just pointing out, like, why would you fight over the, like, if you know that you have one pinch point to fight over the Stasis, why would you not make them spend the additional blue on their next upkeep and also not get to untap?
Yeah, exactly. So if you draw a naturalize on your turn and you hit the Stasis, they go, okay, it dies, right? And then they untap on their turn and they play another Stasis, right? The fact that they got to untap is the biggest issue here. If you can do any of this stuff on their turn, you're kind of always better off, even if it's like you thought like, oh, if I do this and then they use their mana, maybe they won't be able to pay for it, or they're going to see another card, maybe they'll counter my thing. You're almost always better off making them have it then, and then hoping that you draw your other natural eyes later on if they have it. Like, if they have it, they have it. You know, like that's the way I kind of look at it. But you want to make them use as much resources as they can. Whatever you do, don't do it in a way that makes it so that your opponent, the Stasis player, gets to untap all their lands.
Zach, so now that we've talked about good and interesting gameplay, let's talk about zany and dopey gameplay. Why doesn't Thran, Turbine, and Trade Routes make its way into the deck?
Well, I think the biggest issue with Trade Routes is that it's another enchantment that costs 2 that like you kind of just won't care about otherwise. Like, every card in this deck is doing something, and Trade Routes only does something when you're already winning.
Yeah, so you're saying don't play win more cards, Stasis will do the work for you.
And it's also like, it's not like it's getting you the lands back into your hand for free, like Thwart or Daze or Gushes. You have to pay the mana. So you're not doing anything there to like, you know, keep into the game. Like it'd be different if it was like an instant energy and a Birds of Paradise, like they do in old school to keep the Stasis going forever. But that's not the case here. So I don't know. This is, like I said, this is the deck to play if you were all about the punishing, like the stacks, the just that old school like blue mage mentality of like being the better counterspell deck. This is the deck for you. Like if you've ever been thinking like, I want to be the deck that plays the most counterspells, this is the deck. You're basically only playing 7 cards here that you actually otherwise care about, which is Stasis and Black Vice, and then everything else is fluff to keep Stasis and Black Vice in the game.
Yeah, the way that I've like gravitated towards Stasis, even though it plays a lot of the same cards as Stiflenought, but I'm like much less of a Stiflenought gamer myself than I am a Stasis player. And I feel like if you like came from Legacy or like know that space at all, it's like Stiflenought is a lot closer to what like the Delver tempo strategy, even though it is an A+B combo deck. Whereas Stasis is much more like the hard control deck that's like trying to play like what I find very reminiscent about Black Vice Stasis is top counterbalance, where it's like ostensibly you get these 2 things on the table and like the game's not over immediately, but really it's over, you know, and like it's on the opponent to like decide to concede, except Black Vice actually does kill them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's it for Stasis. For our non-Patrons. For our Patrons, we will continue this on Patreon, or if you're watching on Patreon, you're going to see the whole video all the way out, and we will talk about the sideboard plan for this deck. But if you're watching on YouTube, thanks for watching. You can support us at patreon.com/eternaldurdles. $5 gets you the rest of this video, and you'll be able to see the sideboard guide, our sideboard plan for this deck as well. And we'll have the sideboard guide for sale up on Patreon as well.
And we're going to talk about why no Claws of Gix. Zach's going to explain that.
And thanks for watching. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help sustain the Legacy content ecosystem. Just subscribing to this channel goes a long way to reminding YouTube that people love and support this format. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, you should think about supporting us through Patreon. Both the links for subscription and Patreon are right here. And if you're listening on an audio format, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles. Thanks so much for watching.